You're listening to the KB Podcast Network.
Coming up on this episode of the Kingdom Bringer podcast.
So we started dating. We dated for a long time. I was selling cell phones. She was selling cell phones. I remember at one point I was her direct supervisor. And when things had gotten serious, I was like, this probably isn't really appropriate. It wasn't very long, and we started talking to Pastor. I don't know how many times you told me, the Lord cannot bless your relationship when you're living in sin the way you guys are living in sin. All three of the veins in her frontal lobe had a blood clot in her. So her not being able to get out of the bathtub and her mental state that day was caused by strokes.
Okay, man. We are on. We are recording.
Okay.
How's it feel to be in KB Studios?
My son has wanted to be on your podcast, and I'm disappointed that he didn't come with me.
Yeah, man. I told you to bring him. He'd have to be quiet.
Yeah, he wasn't too thrilled about the quiet part.
I'll bet he wanted the third mic. I'm sure he was interested in.
He would have been very interested.
That's funny. So how you been doing, man?
It's been a interesting couple weeks, but I think for the most part, I've been doing good, leaning into the Lord, growing.
It's good.
We're starting spring break, so.
Yeah, man. You're a teacher. Where do you teach at again?
Dodge City Middle School.
Dodge City Middle School. So you got what I would call not so fun age.
Oh, I disagree.
You disagree. Okay. What do you like about it?
Oh, man. The kids, it's really easy to know where you stand with this age group.
Because they'll tell you?
Because they'll tell you.
Okay.
There are some, situations where there's a respect issue, but for the most part, the kids are friendly, and my group of kids, right? I see a very small group of kids.
Yeah.
Teaching special education.
Yeah.
And those kids, they're happy to come in every day. For the most part, they work hard. We laugh a lot because there's usually something funny that's being said. So,
what's your favorite part about teaching? What's your favorite part about that?
Man, I started to get into teaching because I wanted to impact kids. You and I worked together at Youthville years ago.
Yeah.
And that was the joy of working there, was impacting those kids. It wasn't because the stress level was so fun.
Yeah.
But when I first started my teaching career, I was at the college, right at the junior college, and I taught a remedial reading class. And to have grown adults, right, because they're 18 to 22 generally, and then you'd also have some adults that were coming back to school that struggled with reading, and to be able to help them, knowing the impact that can make on their life, that really sparked something with that reading aspect.
Yeah.
And then by chance, I got to teach ELA at the middle school, that's English, with special education students that are very low academically. And I tell you what, being able to work with those kids and seeing the growth that they make year after year in the reading,
mm-hmm.
I love it. And fortunately, I'm changing jobs next year, and that's all I get to do. That's what I'm going to do all day. Every class is, help improve young people's ability to read.
Wow.
And that's, I got held back in first grade for my reading. So it's one of those things that I'm passionate about, and those kids get to see me every day, and we build those relationships. And when they're having a hard day, you can impact them with a smile.
Yeah.
And they know they're going to get to see Mr. Davis every day. They're usually pretty joyful when they come in.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of cool because you've seen kind of both sides of the spectrum. You've seen the struggles that these college kids have had, and if you trace it back, it's probably from the age that you get to deal with them right now. So that's kind of cool that you're preparing them so that they don't end up what you used to teach, kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually just spoke that into one of the students just the other day, Thursday. I was sharing a story about one of my college kids that I still have contact with. He was from the inner city, Chicago, and he struggled with reading, and he was an excellent football player, and he needed to get all of his credits taken care of so that he could go D1. He ended up missing D1 eligibility by like a half a GPA, and he was pretty disappointed, but he persevered and became all conference in the smaller school that he went to. But he couldn't comprehend what he read, but if you read to him, he understood everything.
Wow.
And I have a student like that right now, and I was just trying to encourage him that this young man graduated college with a very similar learning disability.
Yeah.
And man, that's just a testament also to, a lot of people think learning disability, think kid isn't intelligent.
Right.
And that couldn't be farther from the truth. And it's a very common misconception.
Yeah. So with that, I think that's a good point, because usually, like, I'm a kid who had a stutter when I was younger, like a bad bad stutter. And I think that kids that just have even like speech impediments alter the way that they have to do things, which ends up probably being a deficit when they're older in an area, simply because it wasn't because they weren't intelligent. It's because they had to change the way that they did things. I don't know if you've come across that at all, but like kids that have, we call them learning disabilities, but I don't know. Am I on the same?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it becomes like a coping skill.
There you go. That's good.
Yeah. And we see that a lot. And a kid, I have another young man that is an 8th grader this year. So I've had him for 3 years, and we haven't seen the amount of growth that I desire. That is my goal. But the young man, when he tries, he really does an excellent job, but he just hasn't grown how I have desired.
Yeah.
But for himself, he has those coping skills where we try to teach phonics.
Yeah.
Right, where you break the word apart.
Yep.
And some people probably don't know that there are some kids that just cannot do that.
Right.
This young man is one of those students that phonetically he cannot take a consonant vowel and slide them together.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And you would say it was just bah.
Yeah.
But he can't do that.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of that. He'll take B-A-D, and you'll want him to say b-a-ba-d.
Yeah.
And he will, let's say he would know that word, but let's say he doesn't.
Yeah.
He would just put a word that he knows into it.
Okay.
Even though he could say the individual sounds of each letter.
Yeah.
Putting them together, he can't do it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be a whole word learner.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's
crazy.
Yeah.
And those are the kids that you're getting, right?
Absolutely.
You get those kind of deficits or those kind of situations.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess we could do a kingdom in the classroom. But the reason I invited you on, bro, is because I wanted to do kingdom in tragedy. So the idea of releasing the kingdom amidst tragedy. And unfortunately, we all kind of have multiple friends that have experienced tragedy, or you've walked through tragedy with them, and you were the first person that kind of came to my heart on that. And so I wanted to ask you on to talk about that, if that's still okay.
It is.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the tragedy that you've gone through in your life, bro. You've got some fruit from that tragedy with your son, Carson. But I kind of want you to just open it up. Tell us the story, bro, about why you're here. You believe why you're here. Anyway.
Well, it goes back to before I was a teacher.
Yeah.
I sold cell phones. way back in the day when they had bag phones. You young people may need to Google that.
That's hilarious. Was it that long ago?
Yeah, man.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was the master bag phone guy.
Good Lord.
Yeah, there towards the end. I was the only one that had experience with bag phones.
That was a short-lived fad, thank God.
It just took some technology.
That's so funny.
Man, that was before iPhones. It was before texting.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Funny story. When they came out with texting, we were like, this is stupid. Nobody's going to do it.
Who's going to take the time to punch out numbers like this?
And now that's all anybody does.
That is funny.
But yeah, I worked for a cell phone company for about 10 years. Actually, at the same time, as I mentioned before, that I worked at Youthville. I had 2 jobs.
I didn't know that either. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were working both jobs. Cool.
Yep. And then, eventually, we hired this young lady to work with us. And, we would flirt back and forth. And one day I gave in and I was like, all right, we'll go hang out after work. And we had our first date. We were over at her house with her nieces, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I think I've told this story in public before, that at the end of the date, I could tell that she wanted a kiss.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah.
Nah.
This was my pre-Christian days, and I was, yeah. And so I was just playing the game. And she never let me forget that. Her name was Boleyn, by the way. And so we started dating. We dated for a long time. I was selling cell phones. She was selling cell phones. I remember at one point I was her direct supervisor. And when things had gotten serious, I was like, this probably isn't really appropriate. So I took a different position in the company. That was a poor decision. But I took a different position so that I wasn't her direct supervisor. We sat down with my bosses and told them, hey, we are having a relationship.
We're not asking permission. We're telling you that we are in a relationship.
Yeah.
That's good.
And yeah, that was a funny story too. But I don't know that it's appropriate for this podcast.
Thank you for that discernment. That's good.
And so I did that job for a while. And our small cell phone company went up for sale. And they got rid of all of the outside people that were outside of a store, which would be myself and any other outside sales reps. So I got fired. I lost my job. And thankfully, I was still working at Youthville. So I went back to Youthville full time. And I was driving to work one day to Youthville, and I had Sirius in my car because I drove all over the Western Kansas for the cell phone company. And I was listening to the rock station, and you and I, right, we go way back.
Yeah.
By the way, those of you that don't know, Darin and I have known each other since 8th and 7th grade. He's a year younger than I am.
Yep.
He loves this one. I'm going to throw this one out here just for him. I call him my moon because he's always reflected the sun.
Whoa. The S-O-N. That's good, man.
Yeah. He hates that.
Dude, I worked on you for a long time. I remember sitting in athletic buses traveling, sharing Jesus with you, and would always get to a point where you're like, yeah, that was all really good, but it's not for me. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, but I'm not ready yet. Let's just say you were a player. Let's just say you were a I don't know, what's the word, party guy? I don't know. Yeah. I wasn't a partier or a player. But anyway, yeah, that's a brief rundown of our history. But we were friends after that. We lived together after I graduated. We lived in the same house with a couple other guys. I was definitely attempting to be the light in a dark place at that moment, but it was more of a lock myself in the bedroom moment. But anyway, carry on, Jeremy.
All right. So like Darin said, he had been working on me for a long time. And I actually, prayed the prayer when I was a senior in high school. Actually remember the day, September 2nd of 98. I do remember that.
Wow.
Actually, it was 97 because I was a senior. So anyway, but I didn't change anything in my life, right? We always connected over music, really, I think, and our love for the 49ers and the Wildcats.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So Darin was working on me. He's like, bro, you have got to quit being crazy. Because I had a girlfriend in high school sweethearts, or is that the term? That's the term, right?
I think so.
And
that's what the kiddos say.
Yeah, and I actually had a daughter when I was 20. And after that, her mother and I split up, and I went into a depression, and that was fueled by a lot of alcohol and promiscuity. Is that the right word?
Yeah, man.
And it was a really ugly time that you had a front row seat to.
Yeah.
Because you were living with us.
Yeah.
And that was actually at the time that I started to work at the cell phone company, and eventually started this relationship with Belen. And I had gotten fired, driving to work one day, have Sirius on the rock station, and a Christian rock song came on that I was familiar with.
Yeah.
1,000-Foot Crutch. It all falls apart when I walk away from you.
Wow.
Right? And I was like, holy shnikes, this is what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Right? I lost my job. The relationship that Belen and I were in was ugly. It was fueled with drinking, and, she would go to the bar and get drunk, and I would stay home and be happy that she was gone so that I could look at porn.
Yep.
Right? If we're just being honest.
Yep.
And I'd stay at home with the kids. She had a kid. I had a kid. We were not married. We were together for like 6 years, living together outside of marriage. We would fight and argue. And that song came on the radio that day. And I remember I called you.
Yeah, I was at Youthville, I believe, working.
And I was like, Darin, it's time. That was the sign. Like, it was time.
I'll be honest, at this point of my relationship with you, I was kind of fed up. Like, I remember thinking, like, this dude's just never going to get it. He's going to live this lifestyle he wants to live, like, forever. And when you told me that, I if I'm being honest, my first response in my head was, yeah, okay. We've done this before.
Yeah.
We've had this conversation before. Yeah. Sorry.
We had several conversations about how crazy my life was.
Yeah.
And so you're like, yeah, man. And your wife and my fiance at that time did not see eye to eye.
No.
And you had invited us to church many occasions.
Yeah.
Every Sunday for probably like 2 years.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah. This is funny. We were living in Jetmore at the time. And I remember calling you. I told my wife, because you'd give me that phone call that you were ready, right?
Yes.
You'd called me at that point that you were ready to turn your life over to Jesus. And so I held you accountable to that. And every single Saturday night, I would call your phone and say, you coming to church on Sunday? And I'd always get the answer of, yeah, we'll see. Every time. And of course, he never showed up. But it was 2 years that I did that.
Yeah, man.
Every weekend for 2 years.
It's true.
That's so funny.
And so I remember I went home that night after we had that conversation, and I told Belen, I was like, listen, Sunday, I'm going to church. I'm taking the kids. You can come or not.
Yeah.
But something has to change. And thankfully, she decided to go. And so we started going to church with you guys. We had tried out another church, and that I love that. Tried out another church. Ridiculous.
Speaking of that was funny too. the church that you tried was not the church that I went to.
No.
And I felt like that was definitely Boleyn too, right?
Yes, it was.
She was basically, you can go to a church, but we're not going to church with that guy.
Yes. And more specifically,
My wife.
your wife.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
funny.
Yes. That's an accurate assessment.
Women.
I tell you. So, we start going to church. So after we tried out the one church and then they came and visited us at home and talked to us about stuff, I was like, nah, we got to go where
Yeah.
Darin's at.
Yeah.
And reluctantly, she's like, okay. And so we started going to church there, and it wasn't very long. And we started talking to pastor, and we were like, I don't know how many times you told me the Lord cannot bless your relationship when you're living in sin the
Yeah.
way you guys are living in sin.
Yeah.
And I was like, and so, man, we'd been together for 6 years. We got married in 6 weeks after we started going to church.
Yeah.
On a small budget. I mean, threw it together and we got married. And
I remember I remember this also. You guys would come to church and you would never sit with us. You guys would always sit 3 or 4 rows back, again, because of Boleyn. And I remember one Sunday, I forced my wife, and I finally said, you know what? We're going to go back there with them. And so, I don't know if you knew that or not.
I do not. This is amazing.
We actually, I remember I was so sick and tired. I'm like, okay, my best friend has finally come to church, and he's sitting like he won't even sit with me in church. And so we grabbed her purse, we walked, and we forced ourselves right next to you guys. And I do feel like there was breakthrough in that moment with Jamie and Boleyn, and that was hilarious. That's funny.
That's awesome. I didn't even realize that we did
that's
that.
so funny. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
you guys got married quick,
super quick
after 6 years of not quickness.
Right.
Yeah.
And all through that 6 years of not quickness, she wanted to have a kid together, and I was like, our kids are older at this point. We each have one. I'm thinking we're great.
Yeah.
Why do we need to add another one, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And eventually, we got to the point where I was like, you know what? Okay. If it happens, it happens. We won't try to not. How about that? Like, that was the compromise.
Yeah.
And she was okay with that. So a lot of people didn't know this about her, but she smoked, and she hid it very well.
I never knew it until you told me that later. Yeah.
Yes. And so we got married in July of 2009. And in August, actually on my birthday, she always reminded me that it wasn't for my birthday. But
Right.
we were in church, and pastor was talking about, there's something that you want, but God wants you to give something up for him, like sacrifice something.
Wow.
And she quit smoking cold turkey that day. Right?
Yeah.
She was pregnant like a month later. Like, insane.
Wow.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah.
So that was something that she had desperately wanted for years.
Yeah.
Was to get pregnant and that we could have a kid together. And then it happened.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, sweet. And we found out we were going to have a boy, and I was like, yeah, this kid's going to go everywhere with me. Right. We're going to be best buddies.
And we haven't said this either, but by this point, Jamie, my wife, and Boleyn
yeah.
are like best friends.
Yes. Best friends.
So like once we decided to sit together at church, because we all know that going to church means everything as a Christian. That was the
it did
kicker.
at that time.
It did for you guys for sure. No. And so that's what, yeah. So we're hanging out, the four of us, and my wife, Jamie, and Boleyn are best friends. And my wife never really had best friends, man.
Yeah.
Like my wife got saved, met me, and she really kind of, she was the life of the party for years and years and years. She had hundreds of friends. And when she got saved, she really felt like she needed to leave all that stuff behind.
Yep.
And just never really had friends after that. And so, yeah, Boleyn was a special relationship for her for sure.
Yeah.
Whoa. Pop. Jeremy, quit hitting the table.
You can't blame that one on me.
Go for it.
And so, you know, the thing about that is Belen experienced some of the same thing.
Yeah. She did.
After, you know, because we, not only did we just get married, but I began to radically change some things that I was doing in my own life. I quit listening to secular music, which was a big deal for me in that part of my life.
Yeah.
I quit drinking, and I never projected any of that onto her. And in her own time, she made those same decisions and lost many of her friends too because of that.
Yeah.
But through that and the friendship that she had with Jamie, those two were inseparable. They were amazing.
Yeah.
Belen was amazing. She was so outgoing, right? Loud. I think that's the double.
Spicy, I think, is the word that I use.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You always tried to speak Spanish to her.
Spicy Latina.
Which was funny.
Yeah.
Right? You always attempted to speak Spanish.
Well, I didn't attempt. I more mocked her with love. Yes.
Yes. So anyway, so back to, she's pregnant at this point, and
sorry.
No, it's all
she
right.
called me Chonga all the time.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So she's pregnant. We're super excited. And we start going through the pregnancy process, and she doesn't have prenatal insurance. And so we're being mindful of the decisions we make. She goes and gets some blood work done, and it came back that it was a possibility that our child would have Down syndrome. And I wasn't in that doctor's appointment that day. I was at work, and I was out in my car at Youthville, on the phone listening. She had it on speakerphone, and I was listening to the appointment.
Wow.
And the doctor instructed us that we needed to go see a specialist in Wichita to get a special sonogram done so that we could make decisions on what we wanted to do. And we were like, nah, there's no decision that needs to be made. We don't have insurance to cover this. We're okay.
Yeah.
The doctor kind of insisted that we go if we wanted to maintain her as our doctor. So we were like, okay. So we went, and everything came back normal. And I remember before that, Belen had gone up to the altar before that, and she had a moment with God about that topic. And there's other revelation that comes later with her sister and all of that amazingness. And so it comes, the baby is due in June, which is a month shy of our 2-year anniversary, right? So we got pregnant pretty quick after we got married, and everything is great. She's doing great. We go have the baby. Actually, my grandpa died.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. And we had his funeral on Friday, and she delivered on Saturday.
Yep.
And we had a beautiful baby boy.
Yes.
His name is Carson with a K. He likes to tell you that. So this was in 2011, and almost immediately after the birth, she had a horrible headache, and they just attributed it to the strain of having a baby. And we get home, Carson is absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with him, and we progress through the week, and Belen's not getting better. She has a debilitating headache, and I'm taking care of Carson 24/7, this newborn, and Belen progressively gets worse and worse and worse. And finally, about 7 days in, I was really frustrated, and we actually lived on the same street as my parents, and I called my mom at like 2 a.m. I'm like, Mom, I need you to come stay with Carson. I need to take Belen to the ER. So I took her up there. I had done some research, and I thought I knew what was wrong with her, that she had had a epidural and had a spinal headache.
Yeah.
And so we took her to the ER. I shared that thought. The doctor in the ER was like, no, the percentages, the odds of that being what it is are minimum. So they gave her an IV, and we went home. And a couple days later, I had taken my stepson, her son, to summer school. And I'm calling everybody. I called the birthing center. I called the anesthesiologist. I called everybody trying to get her help.
Right.
Her doctor. And I was like, something's not okay. And the thought was that it was postpartum.
Right.
And she just wasn't dealing with it well. And which is understandable, right? And
yeah, because she had a huge personality flip there. I remember she was always outgoing and lively, and didn't seem like herself for sure.
Right.
During that week.
Yeah. And so I called the anesthesiologist people, and they were like, yeah, we really want to get her in and check her out, but we need a doctor's note. And so I called the doctor, and they had agreed to see her. And so that was like a Monday, and I was going to take her to the doctor on Tuesday afternoon, if I remember correctly. And I went and took Justin to school again the next day, and I came back, and she was out of it. Like, and of course I'm thinking it's postpartum, and she had these pain pills to deal with the headache. So I thought she was high off the pain pills.
Right.
Because she was out of it. And by this time, her sisters, there were a couple sisters here at the house helping, and they got her out of bed, fed her some of her favorite ice cream, and I remember I turned on Air One. That was her favorite station.
Right.
Right. And a song came on, Strong Enough by Matthew West. And I was like, babe, look, God's speaking to you. Like, you're strong enough to overcome this.
Yeah.
And we just were believing that she'd be okay.
Yeah.
And her sisters were like, well, let's give her a bath. Maybe she'll feel better after a bath. And again, I thought while I was gone that she had just taken too many of the pain pills. And so they had her in the bathtub, and we were out just hanging around in the living room, and her sister yells at me, Jeremy, I need you to help me get her out of the bathtub. She can't get out of the bathtub. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And I go in, and she couldn't get out of the bathtub. She couldn't use her left arm to help herself get out of the bathtub. And I was like, come on, like, this is ridiculous. Like, let's get out of the bathtub.
Yeah.
And it wasn't happening. And I pinched her hard, and there was no reaction. And that's when crap, this is not good. And so we called 911. I physically got in the bathtub and pulled her out of the bathtub. We got some clothes on her, and the ambulance came. They were like, how long has she been like this? And I was like, a while, a couple hours probably. Like, well, why'd you wait so long to call? And we're like, well, I thought she was high, right? Like we didn't know.
Yeah.
And so we went in the ambulance. I rode with her up to the ER. We were in the ER room. pastor came in, and then current pastor, both of them, they came up there, and they did some tests, and I wasn't in the room, but my understanding is that pastor had a very good moment with her in the ER room, praying together and easing her fears. And we went, I remember I walked out, and standing outside the ER room was my mom, her twin brother, and a sister. And I tell them she has bleeding on the brain. They're flying her to Wichita. And they start freaking out. And I was like, whoa. You guys got to relax. We got to take a deep breath here. We got kids that need taken care of.
Yeah.
I have a newborn.
This is a family where she's like one of 13? Is that
15.
Right? 15 siblings.
Her and her twin brother
14 siblings. Wow.
are the youngest. And so I was like, guys, we gotta focus. We got stuff we gotta take care of here. And so we end up, they get everything taken care of. There's actual thunderstorms, like between Dodge City and Wichita. Big thunderstorms. And they're supposed to take the helicopter. So the helicopter can't fly because of the thunderstorms. So they take us to the airport. And had they taken the helicopter, I wouldn't have been able to go.
Right.
So step number 1 of God's presence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so we get to the airport. They have the flight team ready to go. We get on the airplane, and I am not the best flyer. And Belen was horrified of heights.
Right.
Like, we would go to Colorado, we couldn't go in the mountains.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though we're still on the ground.
Which makes sense. That's a fun trip.
Right.
To Colorado.
Yeah. Let's go to Colorado and not go in the mountains. So she was horrified of heights, scared to death to fly. And I am not a good flyer because I get motion sickness.
Yeah.
And I remember I was explaining to her what was happening, and she started to freak out a little bit because she was going to fly. She didn't want to fly. And they ended up giving her some stuff to calm her down. And we start flying, and they're telling me that we're going to have to fly way south into Oklahoma to go around these thunderstorms. And I'm like, okay, whatever has to happen, let's get to Wichita. And I am sweating profusely, freaking out, like the motion sickness is getting to me. And I asked these nurses on this flight, I'm like, do we have a towel? Like, I need a towel. Oh, we don't have a towel. I'm like, how do we not have a towel on this flight? And for some reason, one had gotten stuck between her gurney and the board she was on and the gurney.
Wow.
And so it was like she was taking care of me again.
Yeah.
Right? So she had a towel for me.
Wow.
And so I had that towel, and I'm telling you, I was sweating. It was bad. And so we land, and I was like, oh, so how far south did we have to go, guys? And they're like, the thunderstorm split. We got to go right through it.
Wow.
I'm like, well, okay. So
yeah,
God's there again.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, awesome. So we load up in the ambulance, because you land at the airport in Wichita.
Yeah.
And then you have to drive to the hospital downtown. We went to Wesley. And they don't run their lights on Kellogg, which I didn't know.
I didn't know that either.
And they said that it would just cause a bigger headache with people getting out of the way. So we get there, and they take us into the ER. They're doing tests. And it had to have been a while, because family started to show up. My family, some of her siblings, and they put her in medical ICU because she had bleeding on the brain. Or I get them confused. It was either medical or the operation ICU. And they came back and they told us that it was actually diagnosed incorrectly here, and that she had blood clots in her frontal lobe. And they needed to get those thinned out of the way. So they had been giving her medicine for bleeding on the brain, which is the opposite of what she would need for blood clots.
Right.
And so we go, and it's pretty late at this point, I remember. And so then we're overnight there at the hospital. And by this time, almost all of the family is around. And people are starting to understand that this is a pretty serious.
I'm sure that's probably close to the time that Jamie's heading that way too. I think Jamie and a couple friends had left Dodge at that point. I stayed back with the kids, and she was probably heading that way. I'm sure at this point. But
yeah, we had a really large group in the waiting room.
Yeah.
And so the next day, they're talking about the process of what needs to happen, and they're checking her for strokes. And I don't know if you remember the conversation that you and I had on the phone.
Yeah.
I was in the chapel, and I was like, bro, I am about to lose it, because I had been really strong through all of that part. And do you remember what you told me? Do you?
Refresh my memory.
So I tell you I'm about to lose it. You say, Jeremy, what was Boleyn's number one desire for her family? I said that they would know Jesus. And she said, and you were like, exactly. So if you freak out today, you need to show them Jesus today.
Wow.
And you calmed me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So so we get through that day, and we go into the night. Yeah. So we spend another night there. And the doctor, I didn't tell anybody this, but the neurologist came in. And he was like, so I'm not an expert in this field, but I've never seen anything like this. This is really bad. She's in really bad shape. And I held that to myself. I didn't share that with anybody. He said that he had never seen all three of the veins in her frontal lobe had a blood clot in them. And it turned out that she had several strokes. So her not being able to get out of the bathtub and her mental state that day was caused by strokes. However many she had. It was more than 3 through that whole time. And so that next morning they had an EEG, or one of those machines that comes in, they strap stuff all over her body, and something happened in that room. I think I've shared this with you, that I believe that she left in that moment. And we went downstairs. They had to do a CAT scan, and I was sitting down there. It was pretty early in the morning, and I'm texting people like, it's in the basement of a hospital. I'm the only person in this waiting room that fits probably 50 to 100 people. And I'm like, what is going on here? I'm texting people, are you coming down here with me? Are you coming down here with me? And they're like, yeah, we're on our way. And through that setting there, I remember praying. I was like, God, if you're not going to restore her back to how she was, like if she's not going to be normal, if she's not going to be, I don't want her to suffer at all. I remember praying that. And like, I don't want her to be in pain. I don't want her to just lay in a hospital bed for the rest of her life. And shortly after, two of her sisters came down, and we were sitting there, and doctors and nurses they just went streaming through the waiting room. And I suppose I can say Mindy's name. Mindy says, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I remember this clear as day." I said, "Well, my wife's back there, and I imagine it's not good." And we get up and we go in the hallway, and she had coded. She had flatlined in the hallway. Not even 30 minutes after I don't know. People talk about giving permission or whatever. I don't know what kind of validity that has, but I had that prayer, and so they revived her, and they took us all up to a room and proceeded to tell us that she was brain dead, and that she was gone, that she was alive by machines at this point. So we're 11 days out of my son being born, and my wife has died. And through the process of my grandpa's death, we had discussed organ donation, and Boleyn was able to save and change many people's standard of living, some of which I know Mindy has contact with. So through our sacrifice, we were able to help many families through organ donation. I would like to encourage everybody to evaluate that in your own life. Your body's not going to go to heaven. So
yeah, it's good.
So if you can help other people, man, I just encourage you to do that. Donate life.
It's good.
.org. Anyway.
It's good.
So her dad is in Mexico and has no idea that any of this is going on, other than she's in the hospital.
His baby.
Yeah, his baby. Her mom had passed several years prior to this, but her dad was in Mexico, and a brother they had brought him up, and they were coming up from South Texas, and there were horrible thunderstorms all through Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. And so through this day and into the night, they had to prepare the team for the organ donation. Okay. And they had scheduled it at, I think it was like 10 or 11 o'clock at night that they were going to start the process. And Dad hadn't gotten there yet. And he was still a ways out. And that was heavy, right? I mean, a dad wants to, like I couldn't imagine. So the storms delayed the first scheduled appointment. The doctors couldn't land. The patients couldn't come in for the organ donation. So they're going to delay it a couple hours. We get word of the second delay, and they're going to delay it all the way to the next morning. I'm like, what? So first off, that gives time for her dad to arrive.
Right.
I mean, what a blessing.
Yeah.
Right? And, some people will say, well, the storms were there. Well, no, that was divine intervention.
Yeah.
I believe. And they arrived safe because they had to drive through the same storms that the people couldn't fly through.
Wow.
And I remember walking out of her ICU room after they had told us we're not going to do it right now. And my brother and I had just discussed, could you imagine getting that phone call? Hey, we have organ donor for you. And then getting the call saying, oh, we got to wait. And then getting the call saying, oh, it's getting delayed again. Like the agony. And I just shared that thought with a nurse as I was walking by. And he turned around and ran and stopped me. And he's like, I can't imagine how you can think of somebody else in this moment. And I didn't think it was a big deal. It was just a thought that my brother and I had shared. And he was like, that is amazing. And I was like, well, I don't know. I just couldn't imagine. I couldn't fathom getting that call. And then who knows how long the folks were waiting.
Yeah.
Anyway, along with the organ donation, my grandma, the wife of the grandpa that had passed just shortly before, that was one of the first questions she asked, was if somebody was able to get eyesight. And I was like, yes, we donated whatever they needed for that, because my grandma had received.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So she wanted to know. And yeah, so that was an awesome moment too with my grandma that I got to share. And so they come the next morning. They have a beautiful little ceremony when you do organ donation, and they took her back, and that was the last that we saw. There was a man at the hospital. I want to shout him out. My man, Ben, his job at the hospital is to work with kids that are in tragic situations and help them understand. And he was so amazing with our kids, because Shaylee and Justin at this point were 8 and 9, I believe. And he worked with them and my niece and nephew that were so close to Boleyn.
Yeah.
And man, I want to shout out Ben, because that dude was amazing. Awesome guy. I still have contact with him every once in a while. And so, they did the organ donation. We had her funeral. It was an amazing service.
Was it, who came and preached at that? Was it a brother or an uncle?
Yeah, it was her brother.
So her brother came. It was definitely a bilingual service. And he came and just preached the gospel.
Yeah.
And so going back to the conversation that you and I had about, her family seeing and experiencing Jesus maybe for the first time, a packed house at this church. And
it was overflow.
The gospel's being preached, man. And, we've already established that I don't speak very good English, very good Spanish at all, but he tore it up. And I remember thinking that was all the music was Boleyn's favorite worship songs.
Yeah.
And it was a worship service for the most part, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah. I had a aunt and uncle that weren't able to be there. They were in Tennessee, I believe, and they were watching it online because we streamed it, because there were so many people that she impacted in her short life. And this has stuck with me, that they were proud of me that I could worship God in that moment.
Yeah.
Because we did. We had a worship service, and the gospel was preached in English and Spanish. And Jason brought it.
Mm-hmm.
That was his first funeral, I believe.
Jason Getz.
Man, he did a fantastic job. The Love Now movement,
yes,
that kind of happened out of that. Yeah, so
let's talk about that, man. That was obviously, we've talked for almost 40 minutes about the tragedy itself. Tragic situation for a young husband and father, for the new child that came into the world, and lots of people were affected by this.
Yeah.
She had lots of sisters that were here locally that did not handle that well. And it was just very tough. A lot of unbelieving, Christian family members, correct?
For sure. Yeah.
That didn't know how to handle this. And I remember thinking the same thing about you. It was difficult for me to watch you in that moment because I think some people may have thought you were emotionless, but it was, I saw the joy in your heart and it didn't make sense. Like even for me, who was trying to encourage you and build you up while this tragedy was taking place, I remember almost being upset with you at the funeral. Like, bro, it's totally okay for you to have a hard time right now. Like, we're all here so that you can, mourn and be sad. And it just didn't come during that time. It wasn't there. But I want to talk about when we were setting up this interview, and talking beforehand, you kind of mentioned you didn't know how much kingdom was released during that tragedy. But I want to say that, I want to talk about some of the fruit that came out of that. We talked about Jason being kind of he was the associate pastor at the time at the church we were going to. For those of you who don't know, that Jason Getz, one of the two brothers on the Two Brothers podcast and a good friend of ours, he was the associate pastor at the time and was kind of one of Belen's sisters, Myrna, had very recently started to come to church at that time too, I think. I don't know if it was before she passed or if
I don't remember.
During or after, but she was mourning the loss of her sister and started to come to church, and the associate pastor was kind of involved with helping a mourning woman. And Jason was very recently divorced at that time, and a beautiful mourning woman needed some support and love, and he was there during that, and they struck up a pretty quick relationship, and he is married to Myrna, now Myrna Getz at the time, so that's some positive fruit that's come out of that.
Oh, Belen wanted that so badly.
Yeah, Belen was trying to hook those two up for a long time. I remember. Yes. Yeah, trying to hook up her sister with her pastor.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's positive fruit that came out of that. And then, as you mentioned, kind of the Love Now movement that happened during that. I still see those shirts around town. Yeah, all the time. The Love Now shirts. I will say that tragedy in my life and my family from that was my wife lost her best friend. Yep. And how long ago was that? Did you say? How many years?
It's been almost 8 years.
Almost 8 years ago. And my wife has still struggled with that, as far as not letting other women in. Sure. She didn't have friends for a while, found a friend, lost her quick, and really took some time to adjust to that for sure. But for you, and I want you to dig down deep, and I want you to just really think about what the Lord has done in your life since then and how you can pinpoint some examples of how the kingdom was released in your life. I know you can do it. For you, what's changed? What's some things that the Lord has done in you and through you from this tragedy that you experienced?
Well, it's been a pretty broad journey over the last almost 8 years, from maintaining what I knew at that point in my life to be a relationship with God, to having that fall away, to rekindling that, to today where, man, that's all there is, is that personal relationship. And so, yeah, my son is amazing. Yeah. He is so much like his mother.
Not so much in the hair department.
No.
Big old blonde curly head anyway.
Yeah. But he's so outgoing. Yeah. Doesn't know a stranger. And that was so much who she was as a person. So it's interesting to see how he has adapted her characteristics, personality characteristics, without
ever
knowing her. And that's been something also that he has had to deal with, that he and I have had to work through together, and amazing counselors in his life, helping that process as well. But that's one of the things that he talks about. He's like, there's other kids that he knows that have suffered a loss, but he says, I'm the only one that didn't know him.
Yeah.
And so just working through that has been, it's been a journey over the last almost 8 years. And
I know relationships was something that was tough for you too after that. Obviously, as a younger guy, single father, you desired relationship with a woman, right?
Yeah.
Let's just be real. You had a wife, and then all of a sudden you didn't have a wife. I know that was always a struggle, and I think I'm proud of you. I feel like you had every opportunity and every reason, really, in the natural, to kind of go back to your old ways of being a womanizer and being a player and getting into alcohol, and you never really did that. And that was awesome that you kind of held tight to the new foundation that you had in Christ. But I know it was a struggle for you, like desiring a woman.
Yeah.
And you went through a couple relationships.
Yeah.
Probably more surfacey than anything, but just that natural desire. And then you found one.
Yes.
You found a woman, right?
Yes.
So I know she's probably going to be listening to this. I think she listens to this pretty consistently. And so shout out to Cassie.
Yes.
Don't want this to be such a downer episode for her, but I really believe that she got to experience a better version of Jeremy because of that tragedy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that that's probably accurate. That loneliness factor, was real big there early. And you talk about early relationships, and I was probably seeking a relationship out of a loneliness.
For sure. Yeah.
Rather than a desire to, fall in love.
Yeah.
For lack of a better.
Yeah.
We went to a men's encounter, and you and Scotty prophesied over me that I was going to find that God was preparing a woman for me, a godly woman, a woman that wanted to desire to have a personal relationship with him. And it wasn't but a couple months, maybe even, that Cassie and I started talking and had our first date on Good Friday.
What a good Christian man.
Yeah, right.
That's how you planned that, I'm sure.
Yeah, our first date was to Good Friday service.
We can't date till next Friday.
Too funny. Awesome. Yeah, so she's amazing. Super on fire. She's very supportive.
Yeah. This is actually an episode that you asked permission from her.
Yeah.
To come on to, right?
Yeah. Understandably,
me being the not so sensitive guy when it comes to this, I asked you to come on here and spill your guts about your wife, and didn't even really think about that. So I'm glad that you did.
Yeah.
You did. And she was very supportive of it, it sounds like.
Yeah, she was.
So what do you I'm going to give you a couple seconds here, to speak to that person, maybe specifically that man that has gone through tragedy or currently in tragedy. What's some words that you have for that person?
I would just encourage anybody that's in any kind of situation. It doesn't even have to be a death, just anything. Talk about it. And that was one of the things that Pastor did with me at the very start, had me talking about it. And that was a huge help. And then don't try to hide your emotions. I remember walking around at Toys R Us bawling. And I finally just sat down in the baby section, and I just sat there and cried at the Toys R Us. I would never shied away from my feelings. I never tried to hide them. I never tried to suppress them. and I let them out. And man, I had supportive family and friends. The church fed me for what seemed like months.
Right.
My sister stayed with me for weeks, helping take care of Carson. The love my brother showed during that time. Just surround yourself with people, and don't be afraid of your emotions, and don't be afraid to be honest with God, and let him work through those questions. Why would, I could have asked, I'm certain I did ask, why would you bless her and then let this happen? Right. And the reality is it wasn't him.
Good.
Right. It was the enemy comes to rob, steal, kill, and destroy.
It's good.
And it certainly was not his desire.
Yeah.
For her to die. So reassure yourself of that and speak it over yourself, especially when the enemy tries to fill your head with lies about it. And seek counseling. Go to grief group. Go to whatever you need to do. Don't be ashamed of it. It's normal. There are other people experiencing it. And be prayerful. I can honestly say that in these last 8 years, that the years that were the most difficult were years that I stepped away from God. That it wasn't him leaving me, it was me stepping away.
Wow.
And so just stay close.
It's good. Well, I want to encourage you too, man. I feel like, you may be hesitant to be able to see or explain how the kingdom inside of you was released during that time, but it absolutely was. And there were probably hundreds of people that were impacted and affected by your steadfast, foundational, just hope that you had in your heart. I mean, you walked in. First of all, you knew that your wife was in heaven. Like
yes.
That's one of those like duh things. And that doesn't take the place of like grieving and mourning that we all know is just there.
Yeah.
And God's actually good. Like he wants you. You should mourn for your wife when she passes away. Right. Absolutely. But I know there was an everlasting hope in your heart that your wife knew the Lord.
Yeah.
And was now spending eternity with him.
Right.
And so that, that's something that we don't all have. We don't all have that knowledge and that understanding and that belief that our loved ones are right with the Lord.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I always said. I was like, well, she ain't going to trade Jesus for me.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah. Give her a second chance. She's staying put.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's good, man. You are to this day, I believe. I love how you can tell this story, and it means something to you. You're not callous to it.
Right.
And the fruit of this tragedy is your son.
Yes.
Right. I mean, you get to look at him every day, and I've actually heard, unfortunately, sometimes people look at their child in those moments and they kind of start having negative thoughts about the kid, like you because of you kind of stuff. And that's awful.
That's gross.
But you've got an amazing love for your son. And I think, one thing that God was able to do, that was kind of God turning what the enemy meant for harm into your good was here's this son that you're always going to have, and you're always going to have that love in your heart,
Yeah.
Memories may fade, and that's probably a good thing for you, but the love in your heart's there.
Sure. Yeah.
For that whole situation. And, I think it's kind of cool that you get to put that love into action now with Cassie.
Yes.
And, it's beautiful. It's awesome.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, buddy, for doing this. I know it was tough. Kind of a all over the place mess, maybe even for your beloved host. But I thank you for coming on, man. Sharing
no problem.
That. Kingdom was released in the middle of your tragedy. So we are all better for it.
Thanks.
Thanks for being who you are, man. Love you, dude.
Love you too.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in once again. Don't forget to check out kingdombringer.com. There you can find the Kingdom Bringer blog that comes out every week. Also, easy access to the podcast itself through Apple Podcasts. Please go on to Apple Podcasts, rate, review, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. That would be amazing. Also, I want to encourage you to visit us on Facebook at KB Podcast. There, you can donate. So if you are interested in doing so and helping us keep this thing going, prayerfully consider that. Click that donate button. It'll take you to a push pay link where you can set up a one-time gift or a monthly giving plan. Either one would be a blessing. We would appreciate that very much. Don't forget to check out the Two Brothers podcast and Supernatural Living with Beth Packard. Both, along with the Kingdom Bringer podcast, are a part of the KB Podcast Network. Your guys' support and listenership is important. We value it. We love you guys. Don't forget to send your questions and comments as well to thekingdombringers@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, interact with you, get a relationship going. You guys are amazing. You're loved. Until next time, be blessed.